Hello, everybody. Welcome to Experience Evolve webinar series. Thanks for so much for joining. We're also glad that you're here because we really like to take this time to be able to explore how organizations evolve and the way they lead, support, and connect with people who matter most. This series is designed to tackle the real world challenges and opportunities leaders face when creating more intentional, human centered experiences for employees, clients, partners, vendors, and beyond. So, if you missed any of our previous webinar series, we did a lot of them about return to the office. That was something very popular for a lot of companies to do earlier
Mhm.
this year. We did one on partner experience, patient experience, and also bias in recruiting, too. So, for this particular one, we really wanted to turn up the volume and dive into a topic every manager and every employee has to learn to dance with: performance management. We're talking about performance funk, not the kind where somebody's leftovers have been sitting too long in the break room fridge. That's not the kind of funk we're talking about. We're talking about finding your groove, how managers can guide growth, how employees can manage up, and how both can stay in rhythm through the ups and downs of performance cycles. So, whether you're managing growth or you're managing out, today's conversation is all about how we create harmony in one of the most tension-filled parts of the organizational life. So, we've all been there. It is definitely performance time. So, I know that as a consultant, I do work with businesses on how to create a great performance cycle, for themselves, how often give feedback and all of that kind of stuff. And of course, it's tied to rewards and recognition. So, as a coach and then also a consultant, and working in corporations for 23 years, I've worked in employee and client experience, and I left the corporate world to be able to pursue working with businesses on an individual basis as a consultant to create insight, to be able to create the impact that they need for their people, processes, and tools, what I call the ecosystem. And then I really believe in the philosophy that real transformation starts with understanding how people experience your organization and then building better from that truth. So, I'm going to now introduce you to Krista Hayes. And Krista Hayes is our guest for today. And I will be going ahead and we'll be doing some Q&A with her and having a wonderful open conversation about performance management. So Krista is the CEO and strategic advisor at Zone Walk Solutions, LLC. Krista is a powerhouse when it comes to driving high performance cultures, optimizing processes, and elevating leadership. With over 2 decades of experience in Prudential Financial, including as a vice president of operations, she has led. Oops, I lost my place. I apologize. I'm reading off a script for you guys that don't know that. She has led large teams, championed employee engagement, and designed systems that balance compliance, efficiency, and humanity. At Zone Walk Solutions, Krista helps organizations bridge the gap between the human experience and operational excellence, helping leaders build stable, high performing teams, streamline processes, and design cultures where people can do their best work. She's also an employee experience strategist, leadership coach, and nonprofit board member. Oh, Krista, you're gonna have to tell us about that. And she's passionate about turning complex challenges into opportunities for connection and growth. Krista, thanks so much for joining us today. And I can't wait for you to bring the groove, for performance management into this conversation.
I'm so excited to be here, Samantha. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Like, you really captured the essence of it, hit all the fine points. I'm really excited for this conversation about performance management.
Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and set the
All
stage.
right, let's do it.
All right. So let's talk about the why. Performance management does have a bad rap. As you know,
Hmm.
a lot of
Hmm.
employees are like, I dread this. Managers dread this.
Hmm.
It's oftentimes, seen as bureaucratic, stressful, or worse, punitive.
Hmm.
How do you define performance management when it's done right?
Yeah, it does get a bad rap. And, it's unfortunate because I really see performance management as the opportunity that we have as leaders to set an intentional tone for the experience that employees will have when they become a part of our organization. There's so many ways to approach it that can be effective, but more importantly, really, it should be rewarding. rewarding for both the employees and for the leadership.
Mhm.
So I'm a big fan of structure, and I do believe that performance management benefits from structure. But it really isn't about establishing structure to me as much as it's about setting clear expectations for performance and maintaining honest, fluid communications about performance. So it's really
Mm.
an opportunity. Like through my lens, it's an opportunity, and it should be one that feels good as opposed to one that people dread.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, I mean, as a manager, manager myself, and also, somebody that has worked with a lot of managers, on their performance management too. I do find that, of course, it is, something that they seem to dread, writing constructive feedback,
Yeah.
writing
Uh-huh.
and making sure, like, oh, did I get everything that they did this year? And, you
Right.
know, yeah, because of that, that does create a lot of stress. And I may, perhaps, even get to it of like, how can somebody actually set themselves for success throughout the year, or however long their cycle is
Hmm.
for performance management.
Well, I mean, it is a process, and it's a meaningful process. So it's
Mhm.
understandable that it creates a certain amount of stress because, when you have stress around things, it's because you care about them.
Yeah.
And you
Oh, love
yeah,
that.
yeah, and you should care about it. It should mean enough to you that you're thinking about how to make it a meaningful process for everybody who's involved.
Yep.
But the reality is, if you have something in place that is clear,
Mm.
that has been communicated, that everyone is aligned to, meaning they understand it. They don't have to agree with all elements of it, but that everyone understands what that expectation is. And if you're
Yep.
having regular communications, then it takes the angst out of it for the most part, even when there's difficult conversations to be had,
Yeah.
because there are no surprises. One of the things I say all the time, consistently, when you're leading leaders who have a responsibility for delivering,
Mm.
performance management
Mhm.
discussions, is when you're putting something in writing, there should be no surprises because you've been having that dialogue. And
Yes.
even though sometimes you may have a conversation that you're thinking wouldn't be a surprise, and it is
Mm.
because
Mhm.
everybody brings their own lens and perspective, um, you talk that through. That's what those conversations are for. So
Yes.
that you have opportunities to reset course, to talk about what the gaps are, to talk about how you navigate someone through this process in a way that feels like growth and coaching, so that everybody wins, because really you enter those processes knowing that you want people to be successful. That works for the employee and it works for the leader.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much,
Mhm.
for that, because and that's a really good thing for leaders to learn, is how to do it right. And I know a lot of times their HR team will dictate, how to do performance
Mhm.
management.
Mhm.
They've got this whole, process. It's like, I even remember as a manager, working for a large technology company, it was like, hey, you need to do this, and this is how you have the conversation, and all of
Mhm.
that kind of stuff. And it was really laid out, very structured. And then there's some companies that are just like, we'll give them feedback, I mean, like, so
Mhm.
it's not so structured. And so it's really good for leaders, regardless if it's super structured or if it's not,
Mhm.
structured at all, to be able to figure out what is the best way to be able to deliver, that
Yeah.
feedback to the employee, how to frame the conversation, and be able to have it be a psychologically open, safe space as well,
Yes.
for
Yes.
them. Okay.
Mhm.
Let's talk about finding the groove.
Okay.
So, when you work with leaders, what
Mhm.
separates those who create growth focused performance conversations for those who are unintentionally create anxiety?
Yeah. So my gut response to this is easily a lack of intentionality or a lack of communication.
Yeah.
So, and this kind of ties to some of what I said in my last response, but you really just want to make sure that you're having regular conversations and that you're expressing a genuine interest in understanding an employee's goals. This
Hmm.
removes all the guesswork. And so
Yep.
it takes the anxiety out of it. And if you are in a perfect world where either of these things can be aligned to the current role, or at least it reveals enough for you to understand like what a better fit might be, if that fit exists, then
Mm.
you start to build trust. You show there's an interest in moving that employee in the direction that's meaningful for them. And so you're now having growth focused conversations, and it does take the anxiety. I mean, I can recall periods in my own career where I kind of dreaded the performance conversation, and I had those
Mhm.
where I couldn't wait. I'm like, oh my God, my one on one is today.
Yeah.
And you want the latter.
Right, exactly. And you're right. I mean, that goes back to the psychological safety, though, right?
Mhm,
Did you create an environment with your employee that you can have open conversations? Is there going to be surprises? And hopefully, there's no surprises within their performance. I know that even talking to some people, they had managers that, there was a formal system that they would put their feedback
mhm,
in, and their manager would sit down with them and say, "You did great. Everything looks great," that sort of thing, and then they would put them into the system, and then they would list it. They wouldn't even tell the employee
mhm.
this in the conversation, but they list all the bad things they did and then give them a bad performance rating.
Oh, that's so
And they'd be
hard.
like, "Whoa, that was a surprise." They didn't even, tell them their
Yeah,
rating or, anything like that.
right.
So those kind of things, we definitely want to create that psychological safety like within the moment, too, but then also there's no surprises. So you did give some real-time feedback if
Mhm,
something did occur. And then, also that you're not putting something into the system that you didn't even discuss with them or give them an opportunity to be able to talk to you about too.
right.
Those are important things. Okay. Let's talk about the manager's mix of growth and
Mhm,
accountability. So, how
mhm,
can managers balance compassion and accountability, especially when deciding whether to manage growth or manage out?
mhm. Yeah, this is a really important question. And, the first thing I say is the best leaders are leaders who lead from a baseline of genuine compassion.
Mm,
And when you do that, what you just described, like kind of that dilemma and that
yeah.
balance, really isn't as hard as it sounds.
Yeah.
Because again, if we're talking about having regular communication, so hopefully if you're doing that, you're beginning to build some trust because you're talking about the things that you want to talk about. Even if someone's performing and it's good, like they still need to hear from you. They still
Yeah.
want to see how you move. When you say you're going to do things, do you do them? Can they come to you and ask questions? Can they challenge something you've asked them to do? Like, how does that feel?
Yeah.
And but if a person is underperforming, you have to make sure you're sharing those things too. But the
Sure.
reality is, again, if you're having this dialogue along the way, sharing something that didn't a result that didn't show up quite right, or some type of performance that didn't look quite right, really is just a question about what happened and why.
Yeah.
And again, people are then you're having a conversation and you're discussing it, and you start to begin to identify opportunities to address. So what happens though is if everybody's in it for the right reasons, you're giving that guidance, right? And so it's not so hard. It's not great because someone's underperforming and you're giving guidance over and over and you're not seeing a shift. Everyone's got to take a step back. And I like to challenge leaders in these situations too to make sure they're not only looking at the employee's performance, but make sure you're looking at yourself.
Mm,
What kind of guidance are you giving? Are you giving them the right guidance? If these things are happening, if you have a performance process that's been consistent, if you've been, say, action planning and trying to take steps toward goals and the gap is not closing and you're doing your part and they're working really hard, what is important for leaders to not lose sight of is usually that employee is pretty stressed out
mm,
because you don't show up to work not to perform.
yeah.
And so this is where, when you think about managing out, we have to really reframe our mindset around when and why we do that. It's not always a negative thing. It has this perception of being a negative outcome. I'm not saying it's not impactful. You're talking about, a loss of job, but if a
Mm-hmm.
person is in the wrong job,
Yeah.
the job's not being done, your
Mm-hmm.
clients aren't getting what they need. As an employer, you're not getting what you need, and the employee is not getting what they need out of the experience. They need to be free.
Sure. Sure.
So I think when you're doing these things from a place of genuine interest, you're following the model that you set for how you're going to move through this process.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's working toward a common goal. When you do all of those things, you don't have that difficulty or the guilt, even. I mean, you're human beings, you feel something, but you also know that you're doing what feels like the best course of action for everyone involved, including that employee you may have to let go.
Yeah, absolutely. I can think of several times in my
Mhm.
career that I have managed people out and not in a negative way, but in a you've been in this role long enough. It's time for you
Mhm.
to move on. And I'm going to try to, like I'm
Yes.
going to hopefully instill the confidence in you to be able to move up to the next level, or to move, to a different part of the company, or, something like that. It's not that they were doing a bad job. They might have been like the best at it, but now it's time to give somebody else an opportunity to be able to step up to that role. And so those are the kind of things. And I do find that, like, some employees have a really hard time of letting go, too.
Mhm, mhm,
I
mhm.
did have an employee one time, and they were trying to straddle both camps, like their old role in my team, and the new role. And eventually I just had to cut off the system to the or like
Yes.
to their access to the system and say,
You
you're
can't
done.
do this
you know
anymore.
right, like, you're done.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I totally understand, because and I've had it, before. Like, this is my baby. Like, I've built this
Yeah.
program or whatever it is, and it's really hard. But, like, to manage somebody out, that does take a new skill as well, too, especially for people that are either stubborn or have a hard time letting go.
Well,
So,
that's a great point. I'm really glad you introduced that perspective because I was speaking a lot about underperforming, but that's fantastic. And how rewarding is it for you as a leader though when someone has kind of outgrown a role
yeah.
and you help them navigate to something that helps them grow into their continued increased potential?
Yeah.
That's a beautiful thing.
Well, I mean, and there's also some people that are just, they're fine at that level. They're fine at that job. That's
Yes,
all they want to
yes.
do for the rest of their life. Where are they in their life? Are they in a growth time, or are they, hey, I just want to stay right here. I want to keep
Mhm.
my head down because I don't want to get laid off, or, anything like that. I want to
Or
become irrelevant.
maybe I have things going on outside of here. I don't have anything more
Yeah.
to give. This is
Right.
easy and consistent, and this is where I want to stay.
Love it. Yes,
Mhm.
exactly. Exactly. Let's talk about feedback without the funk, though.
Mhm.
So, feedback can feel awkward, even
Yeah.
for seasoned leaders, especially if they're faced with somebody that might have adverse views than them, right? So,
Mhm.
what are your favorite strategies to make feedback less cringeworthy and more constructive?
Cringe word. Where was that word all my life? Like it's the best.
Right. I love cringe.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm gonna say it again and again because it's so important. Consistency and frequency is really important here. But when
Mm,
you know you have difficult feedback, something I like to really encourage people to do because it's priceless to me in this process is to see yourself on the receiving end of that feedback.
mm,
So particularly when you're writing something, but even if you're not, so the first thing I say is like prepare, 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 right? So let's say you've been having the consistent conversations. There's
mm.
been formal and informal feedback, perhaps, and now it's gotten hard, and you have to say something really tough. Whether you're
Yeah.
saying it verbally or whether you're putting it in writing, say it. Like
Yeah.
actually say the words because we're living it. And so we know it's here. And we might know the scenario inside out. We might have all the greatest intentions. We might be really good at what we do when it comes to that. But if it's really hard, you need to say those words and see how they feel.
Yes.
And then you get to see how it feels to interact with you.
Mm.
And if it didn't feel quite right, go back to the drawing board. You
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm. And when you have that conversation, you now feel prepared. It'll be a smoother exchange and you'll feel equipped to respond to whatever response you may receive because you've been thoughtful about how you deliver something you knew that was going to be tough.
Mm, mm. Yeah, because this like really brings up something very strong, like what you're talking about here.
Mhm.
Because you're talking of treat others as you would like to be treated. So testing it on yourself first. And Krista, I'm just a huge component, of somebody that wants to do the platinum role of the time, which is treat others as they would like to be treated, which obviously takes a lot more work. You got to really know them. And a
You
lot of
do. You want to
companies.
think about how they want to be treated.
Right,
Mhm.
exactly. Like, would you might like directness, but they don't like directness, right? They want you to kind of sugarcoat it a little bit. Or maybe the opposite, of that, where you normally sugarcoat things and you need to be very direct, very clear, very concise,
Yeah.
with them. And so
Yeah.
there's different types of people too. And actually, I was just talking about this in a mastermind I was in earlier about the different personality types, and
Oh,
how do
yeah.
people prefer things. I
That's
mean,
right.
there's a million of them, right? There's Myers-Briggs, there's a Clifton Strength
Uh-huh.
Finders, there's
Uh-huh.
Insights, DISC. We were talking about the 6 acts of thinking. I mean, there's so many different ones, and a lot of companies, and this is the good thing about those, is a lot of companies utilize those particular personality type tests to
Uh-huh.
find out more
Yeah.
about their employees, to learn more and learn more about their preferences. And if teams can go through those things together and say, I'm an I, or, I'm an
Mhm.
INFJ, or, like all of those, different labels that you can put on, somebody to better understand them. And I should say labels, to just say, oh my gosh, they're a black cat today, or, anything like that. You want to understand them. And so I think those are the kind of things too of when giving feedback, to
Mhm.
know somebody how they prefer to receive the feedback. But there might be some times, too, where you can't sugarcoat it as well. You have to be a little bit more raw, because if you do sugarcoat it, it's going to make it sound like it's worse than it is. And it might be something bad, that you really need to change in the behavior, and rather not go to the punitive side of it,
Right.
where you're punishing
Mhm.
somebody, for it. You're giving them the facts, to be able to help them to
Mhm.
truly understand what's the issue and how to correct it.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. Knowing who you're talking to is important. You have to know yourself too,
Yeah.
because you want to meet them where they are, but you have to be able to deliver it in the way that is going to be feel aligned to you as a leader and your
Yes.
spirit. And you want to bring these two things together so that at the end of the day, no matter whether it was soft or a little more direct, depending on what it is you're dealing with,
Yeah.
what you don't want is for them to leave and not have received the message.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Uh-huh.
or get a different impression of how you feel about it, I should say.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Well, and I in my career and everything, this next subject about managing up, that's something that I always looked at, and maybe because I come from working with people, my original job was working with people from the greatest generation and the boomer generation, and there is a lot of hierarchy there,
Mm,
that,
mhm.
your boss, tells you what to do.
Right.
Your boss says jump, you jump, that sort of thing. And so there wasn't a lot of I don't want to say back talk. That's the wrong
Two-way
terminology.
conversations, not a lot of two-way
Right.
conversations
Yeah,
going on.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like, you took orders and you said yes, sir, and you did it,
Uh-huh,
right?
uh-huh.
But the thing is that there is this is something that I learned, slowly actually in my career, is the managing up thing, because performance management isn't always top down. There are certain ways for you to help your manager to understand you, more.
Mhm,
And if they're not even asking, and not in a forceful way or anything, um, but there's also ways, for employees to help manage up. And I know that, like, I'm just going to make an example of this, and let's talk about,
mhm,
ways that people can manage up. But I did have an employee one time, and there was a project that was happening, and they were expecting the project manager, because the project manager was definitely a higher, a different. Up levels in the hierarchy, I
mhm,
should
mhm.
say. They were expecting that person to come to them and tell them what to do. And, well, I mean, that person didn't even know that they needed to be involved in the project. I mean, there's several different things. And yeah, because somebody's a different um, tier, if you will, in the company, or level, or whatever you want to
Mhm.
call it in the company, there's still that cross collaboration, regardless at what level you're at. And
Right.
so I did encourage that employee. And this is before I had just started managing the team. And so I didn't realize that this had happened. But helping to empower your employees too, to know when to reach out, and to be maybe even a little bit forceful as well, in some case in a kind way, but to let them know that you need to be involved, because that's your area of expertise, or something like that. But obviously, in performance management, there's a way to do this too. So what advice do you give employees who want to manage up effectively during the review cycles or tough conversations?
So, interesting, we talk about during the review cycles. Um, if you're at the review period, if we're talking about kind of a structured annual or semi-annual review process,
Mm,
um, I'm trying to think if that's easier or harder. There's a part of me that says, well, it's a little easier because everyone's in kind of performance management mode.
mm,
So your leader is more than likely delivering some type of dialogue around your performance. You've probably seen something in writing. Hopefully you saw it before the meeting. Sometimes you don't. Depends on how people do things. but there's already a performance conversation happening. So there's an opportunity for you to kind of respond to some of the things that they're saying and say, hey, particularly in areas where you're talking about changes to what someone might like to see. It's like, I hear that and I could do that. Maybe you could help me do this or that. So
Yeah.
there's already a conversation that's happening. I find that sometimes where it's really challenging is, let's say you're not in a performance discussion and you're having challenges with your boss. And how do
Mm,
you manage up because it's not changing and you don't know what to do? And to your point, you have different generations that kind of operate differently in a workspace, and even without that, there's just a clear power dynamic that's at play. I mean, one
yeah.
person reports to another person. And so it takes a lot of courage to bring something to the person to whom you report, to their attention,
Mhm.
and say something, you're finding something disruptive, or it's maybe getting in the way of you meeting their goals. They're asking you to do something, you can't do it. Like, it can be really difficult because, for a couple of reasons. One, there's a fear of repercussion, so you want to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
I like to encourage people when they have those situations, even if whether it's off cycle or during a performance review, to
Mhm.
ask questions.
Mm,
Asking questions is a great way to get a conversation going and kind of disarm people so they're not quite so defensive.
yeah.
And then the other thing it does is everybody brings their own perceptions. So
Mm,
if you just make room for the fact that your perception is just that, it's not about right and wrong. And if you're asking a question, you may learn something through that approach that changes your perception
mm,
and really kind of softens the need to give upward feedback in quite the same way. So
yeah.
I think it does a couple of things. It may disarm in a good way, in that the person receiving that, the person you're managing up, who's probably somebody you report to, is able to not be reactive in a negative way, but maybe also it gets you heard.
Mm,
At the end, it's more than just not having, negative repercussions. You want to be heard and
yeah.
hope that there's a shift in whatever it is that you're experiencing. And maybe the two of you learn something about how you can interact differently. So
Yeah.
I say enter that conversation, not assuming you're right, just
Mhm.
knowing that it's your experience and you want to see a changed experience.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, and so I know that what you're talking about, is more of the type of process and conversation and everything. I'm also thinking about like practicality too. I spent
Uh-huh.
many years as a chief of staff too, and sometimes I had to keep on top of my manager,
Uh-huh.
um
Oh. Uh-huh.
to make sure that they were actually hitting the goals or the
Mm-hmm.
checkpoints and everything in the performance management. So, hey, did you submit my performance review? Okay, great. I would ask those like practical, like,
Yes.
type
Yes.
of questions too. But then, I also think about it too. Sometimes, managers do miss things,
Mhm.
too, in the performance cycle. And they might lean more towards the negative, too, on a person. And that's a lot of
Yeah.
times based on bias, let's just
Uh-huh.
call it what it
Uh-huh.
is. But, there's times in the performance cycle that managers need to prepare obviously for giving
Mhm.
that feedback and making sure they're as thorough as possible and clear, but employees need to do the same too. They
Absolutely.
also need to prepare, to either provide evidence of their performance or things like that too. And that's difficult for both people, because if you don't come with a shared reality
Yes.
in the conversation, that does make it difficult.
It does. I
Yeah.
agree. And I would also say, as much as we're talking about how to make these conversations productive,
Yeah.
right? And hoping that if you use some of these strategies, it will give you a positive outcome. You'll feel like you're moving forward.
Yep.
Sometimes it just doesn't happen. And I think it's important to pay attention to those signals as well. And it doesn't mean it will never happen. It may mean that you just need more than one conversation.
Sure.
So it's like, be open to kind of reading how this thing is going, kind of be prepared to pivot if you need to,
Yeah.
and know that something may need to be revisited so that you actually can get some movement. And it may
Mhm.
not happen in this single attempt.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. That's great. Let's talk about the rhythm of recognition
Yeah.
too. So, how can leaders make recognition part of their regular rhythm instead of just a once a year thing? And I know some companies have more than just once a year, but let's just
Yeah.
say that for
Yeah.
performance management, if this is
Mhm.
the only time you're giving some recognition, how can they make it a regular rhythm?
It's, I think, like anything, that you want to see some type of repetitiveness, and you want to make sure it's part of the culture. You have to commit to the change. So I look at that and I say it sounds kind of like, yeah, yeah, rah rah, but you do need a recognition plan, because
Mm,
if you don't create a roadmap for change, how are you going to get there?
mm,
People are big. Some people are inclined to recognize. You have to build a muscle around it, just like anything else, though. Some
yeah,
people are inclined to recognize. Some people are not. It's not because they're not good leaders. Everybody's focused on trying to get the work done. People work differently, and even if you're inclined toward it, when you get really busy, sometimes things get lost. If you build
yeah,
a strategy around it, and you have something you can hold yourself accountable to, or maybe you have peers, you can make each other accountable, and if you communicate it, your employees will make you accountable as well. It will help you develop that muscle. I think
definitely.
it's you need that. Without that, it gets really difficult. It's just like trying to change a habit in your personal life. If you don't do something consistently, it's hard to build a muscle that creates a new habit. And you need those new habits to build a culture that is one that is supportive of recognition and appreciation, I'll add, which
Mm,
is, a little bit different. But both of these things matter to culture in terms of getting to a culture of trust. Recognition is about getting to a culture of trust where people feel valued, they want to come to work, they feel like someone will recognize that they are putting forth this effort, and everyone wins. And so, without
yeah,
a committed strategy to recognition, the same way you commit to other hard goals and productivity and things like that, then it feels like it's not as important. And we want to make sure people know it's important.
yeah. Oh, that's absolutely wonderful.
Mhm,
Thank you. Let's talk about your operations background a little bit.
mhm,
So let's talk
mhm,
about how process meets people here, in of course, performance management cycles.
mhm,
So, what do you think are the most common pitfalls organizations face when systemizing?
mhm,
Um, did I say that right? Yes,
mhm,
performance management.
mhm. So, yes, I love a good system.
Yeah, me too.
And I think that one of the biggest mistakes I've seen happen, especially in the performance management space, is creating a system, communicating a system, and then not consistently applying the system.
Ooh, love that.
So you set it up. This is what we're going to do. You do some of the work to get people on board. They expect it, and then what happens? They don't have a timely appraisal,
Mm,
or the communication that was supposed to happen in between, and all the things, the goals and the milestones you set, none of that happened. Or you promised them something related to their growth and now you're not making good on it. Like, creating a system and communicating it and not seeing it through is really one of the worst things you can do. It really just erodes the trust and starts to chip away at something that you were trying to stand up and build.
yeah, yeah, definitely.
Something else that I think can really get in the way when it comes to performance management is maybe kind of choosing the wrong performance management system. I think
Mm,
it's important that a performance management system match the culture of the organization. And it's not a one size fit all kind of thing. And many times it's a hybrid approach. I mean, a traditional annual, semi-annual process, that good system has its place. It does. I mean, if you're in something that is deep in hierarchy, if it's compliance driven,
mm,
sometimes that structure is the right thing. And then you have not only good documentation, you have a process that people can look forward to help them know that they're on the right track. But there's also things that are really based more on continuous feedback, or maybe strength based cultures where there's coaching that is really built into that, and there's more of a focus on that than just pure results. I find that in most cases, some hybrid approach is what kind of brings things together to get the right result. But you need to figure
mm.
out what that is and not wing it. You need to be
Yeah,
clear on
absolutely.
what it's going to be so you can share it and then you can make good on it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And this is, something that you bring up too. I have seen definitely some systems where the actual words of the culture, the phrases that they use for the culture, are for you to bring forth your performance based on those culture aspects. So
Mhm.
let's just say it's caring. How did you, during this year or whatever time frame it is for performance, how did you show caring, as part of the work that you did? And so at that time you might say, well, I taught my other team members, about
Mhm.
this, aspect. I showed care, to other people by making sure I respond to their email. Yeah, I mean, like there's so many different examples of
Uh-huh.
how you
Mhm.
could do that. But I do see that, as far as like integrating the culture in with the course and the performance measurements. And looking at that too, and then not only that, but individual stretch goals, like all of that good
Yes.
stuff too.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's good. I'm going to skip over a couple of the questions that we have because I believe that we answered,
Okay.
them
Sure.
pretty good. I do want to ask, what do you think is one thing this week to improve performance conversations that managers can do, and what would you recommend that they do?
So if I was gonna kind of hone in on one thing, I'm going to give you a sort of a two because I'm going to assume one thing is happening. But if it's not, if you're not having regular one-on-one meetings, you got to have them. I just
Yes.
think that they're so powerful, and I'm
Yes.
surprised by how many people don't necessarily do them or leaders don't really commit to them.
Mm,
You're missing a powerful opportunity for a conversation that will give you insight in a way that you really don't understand if you're not doing it, and it is a powerful tool to building trust, and it really helps the employees feel like they're being supported. Again, you take something away from those conversations and make sure that you're staying the course on what you learn there, but it's a powerful tool. Let's
mm,
assume that that's happening. If I give a leader one thing that I think they could do, I say this. Um, Ask in your next one-on-one meeting, maybe ask that employee to tell you one thing you can do to support them.
I love it.
Now, that is different than saying, "Hey, is there anything I can do?" We
Right.
all say that. No, you want to tell them they have to give you something,
Yes.
and then it makes it safe for them to actually do so.
Mm-hmm.
And they may really struggle because maybe you guys are really connected and you're doing a great job. But if you say it that way, you will know that if they had something to put out there, there's a much greater chance they'll actually do it.
Yes. That's funny because you bring up 360 performance
Mhm.
feedback, too.
Yes.
And that kind of made me think about it too, because I had a manager, and I'm not going to dog on a manager or anything like that. But I had a manager, and he would always ask that question: "What's one thing I can do this week to support you?" And I'd always say the same thing. I need you to talk to your peers about what I'm doing, because they need to be involved as well too. And I'm not seeing a lot of activity from
Uh-huh.
them. And every single week, it would be the same thing. What can I do? I need you to talk to your peers and that sort of thing. And it was never happening because I would go talk
Oh.
to his peers and I would find out no, he never talked to them about the project. He never talked to them about keeping up with their tasks on the project, blah, 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 all that good stuff.
Mhm.
So it was one of those things that you think about it too, because there are companies that do 360 reviews, meaning that the employees have an opportunity
Yes.
to give the manager a rating or to give feedback on the manager. So that way their leader can understand
That's
how
great.
to do it. Because a lot of times, and this is something I worked for another company too, they would always ask us, who do you want to give feedback on you? And so, of course,
Mhm.
some people would always choose people that would give them glowing
Strong
praises,
positive
right?
feedback. Yes.
And not anybody that would give them the constructive feedback or maybe
Mhm.
even negative feedback, about it. I was always, and maybe this is probably why, it was always a good conversation with my managers. I would always ask for people that I knew were not fans of mine in particular. I would always ask people that were fans. I would just ask at all levels, of
Uh-huh.
people, but mainly it was the people that I worked with the most, and
Yes.
not everybody's going to be a fan of you. And some people are going to always not talk the best about you. I mean, that's just how human nature is, unfortunately. But it's that sort of thing of, that whole thing. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like maybe there's a couple of ideas that you brought up here that maybe we can even do further webinar series on, and that is 360 performance
Mhm.
feedback. That would be a good one too, because there's a lot of psychology behind that.
Uh-huh.
And then also, maybe we can even talk about one-to-ones, like how to do a proper one-to-one, because I
Mhm.
think that you bring up a really valid point, because that is the time to that managers can give regular feedback. I'm not going to say
Yes.
on time feedback because that usually happens after something occurs, but
Mhm.
that's something that we can definitely go through. So, anyway, I feel we can put a bow on this one. This is
Yeah.
pretty good. Yeah. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I just say we've talked a lot about what leaders can do and
Mm,
some about employees as well. And I think if I had a final thought, I would just ask employees to like really take a moment, like give yourself permission to really think about the vision for the
mm,
experience you want to have in the workplace. Doesn't
mm,
mean you have to solve it all. I'm not talking about this solid 5 year plan. It's more like, what do you see for yourself? Maybe what do you see next for yourself? And
yeah,
if you can look down the road a little bit, like what do you want work to feel like? What are the things that you do that you enjoy?
yeah,
And just be intentional about it for yourself. We spend a lot of time at work.
yeah,
And if you're interested in growing that experience, as opposed, some people, like you said, show up to work and just want to pay the bills and go home, and there's nothing wrong with that.
yeah.
But if you're looking for support to create an experience, you have to give people something to work with. So give the same commitment to yourself that you're asking of others, and then be bold enough to share it with your leadership so that you can give them an opportunity to support it.
Yes. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, and that's good because I don't think a lot of people do think about, they
Hmm.
think about the issues that they maybe come across as a roadblock and everything, but they don't think
Right.
about necessarily, well, and then also like what's in their control, versus
Hmm.
their manager's control. And I know that I even had, some people that I was leading that they would just give me the issues and expect me to solve them. And
Yes.
sometimes it is an open conversation, with them of, well, how do you expect this to be resolved, and what would you do, and and going back to the ecosystem of people, processes, and tools,
Hmm.
for this particular issue, who do you need to have a better relationship with in the
Hmm.
company?
Hmm.
Partners or a vendor or
Hmm.
something too, if
Hmm.
there's an issue with that externally. What what in the process is actually breaking down or causing that issue,
Right.
and then also, is it a technology issue, that we need to talk
Right.
about?
Ugh, yes.
And so, I mean, there's a lot of those kind of things that rub people in a certain way. But yeah, anyway, it's just I love how you framed that up about experience too, because that
Mhm.
is something that a lot of people, I mean, just because we both work in employee experience, the
Mhm.
survey that goes out, that's the one time that usually a lot of companies ask, how's it going, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And when somebody gives feedback on that, and then the company doesn't actually take that feedback and read the feedback and take it into
Oh, goodness.
consideration,
Oh,
oh
no.
God, like I
Again,
was
not
right.
following through on the system you
Yes,
put in
yes,
place.
exactly, exactly. And so
Mhm.
eventually the employee is going to give up and just say, I already
They're
told
not
you
gonna
once.
offer any feedback.
Right. They're just gonna be
Mhm.
like, oh my gosh, And I know that you can't address every single bit of feedback, on a survey, especially if you have thousands of employees, because the thing is that you do also have to take some things with a grain of salt. If one person
Mhm.
did
Yes.
say it, I mean, and this is what I tell managers too. I'm sorry, we're going into employee
But
experience
you know what you
surveys
can
all of a
do?
sudden.
What you can
This is
do is
another one.
share that thought process. I
Yeah.
can't address every piece of feedback, but here are the
Yes.
key themes. And here's
Yes.
why.
Exactly.
Like, it's again, it's about
Exactly.
why we're doing what we're doing. It's not because it's a waste of time. It's just we need to make some progress. And when you
Yes.
share these things, it helps. There's some people you're never going to get on board. And that's okay
Oh yeah.
too.
Yeah.
But you
Yeah.
share that
Exactly.
transparency goes a long way for most people.
Right, right,
Mhm.
exactly. Yeah, and exactly having that particular transparency too. But I mean, and this is something too that I want to say is a lot of times, because people get overly surveyed,
Yeah.
at work sometimes too, where
Uh-huh.
they feel like that what they're saying is falling on deaf's ears.
Hmm.
That's one thing is that they'll stop giving that feedback altogether. So I do find if somebody does put a question or like something in the survey, um, and I might feel like maybe other people feel the same way, but they have given up on saying that,
Yes.
right? And
Uh-huh.
so that's the reason why pulse surveys are great,
Yes. Yep.
just like, doing performance management pulses, when you do with
Hmm.
your one-on-ones, it's the same kind of thing too. You might
Hmm.
want to ask that question in the next one if you do feel like it is an issue, if you are kind of seeing a theme about it as well.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Like, treat it
Anyway,
like a poll. Quick polls they're fun and people
yeah,
answer them a lot of times, especially if
yeah,
they can do it
exactly.
live.
Right, exactly, and they can see the results right there,
Yes.
and they can,
Yeah.
"Hmm, okay, okay." Well, good. Well, I'm going to go ahead and put it into the webinar show notes, where people can reach you on your
Okay,
website, on LinkedIn.
wonderful.
Anywhere else that people can reach out to you?
LinkedIn's probably the best place because it has it. There's a contact link there, so it can schedule time with me, and it can
Nice.
also in services they can really get a kind of a good look around the services that I offer. So I encourage people to go there. It gives good information, and I look forward to hearing from anybody who's interested.
Fantastic. All right. Well, great. Well, thank you guys so much. And thanks for joining Growth Groove, moving up,
That's so
moving
cute.
out, and all around.
All right.
Thanks so much for keeping the funk with us here. So
Thank you, Samantha. This was fun.
thanks. All right. Wonderful.
Okay.
Well, thanks, everybody. And please go to samanthaelizabeth.com and click on Experienced Evolve to check out all of the other wonderful content about experience, to learn more about Experienced Evolve and everything that we've covered thus far. Is a million topics I want to say out there now. Well, good.
Bye.
Thanks for watching the webinar today. Experienced Evolved is for leaders and other people who care about employee, client, partner, vendors, and beyond experience. We have a framework, a newsletter, webinars, videos, and a podcast coming soon, and other helpful content. If you missed any of our previous content, you can go to samanthaelizabeth.com and look for Experienced Evolved.